racial equity and diversity policy, next steps. And after we met with Shannon, I did prepare some remarks in anticipation of people being in the audience tonight that would have an interest in this issue. And I just want to start by saying that we appreciate you very much coming and talking to us, and we are listening. We're taking your concerns very seriously, and we're grateful for the opportunity to bring the conversation out into the open. We welcome your voices, insights, and support as we come together collectively to meet our shared challenges head on. Superintendent Francois has put together a plan of action and response, and the Board of Directors is strongly committed to the district's mission of strengthening our community through excellence in education. That means providing a safe, inclusive learning environment for all students, where any type of harassment, intimidation, or bullying is unacceptable. Our community, like many around the country, is both growing and changing. Our new demographic reality has required that we discuss both the challenges and the opportunities that have presented themselves. We have reached out to engage the Latino community, as you've heard. We met with them for the Latino conversations with the board, and earlier this year to discuss the proposed boundary changes. And then we also had planned the diversity and cultural training for the board and staff, but recent events have necessitated that we accelerate those plans. Our concern has always been, and will continue to be, to provide high-quality education for all of our students in a safe and thriving learning environment. So regardless of age, sex, genetic information, sexual orientation, including gender expression or identity, race, creed, religion, color, national origin, or the presence of any sensory, mental, or physical disability. Those are the many dimensions of diversity that are codified in law and that we consider as we strive to meet students and families where they are. Our goal is always to prepare students for success, and when we fall short, we are very open to hearing from you, our students, our families, and community. We welcome transparency and accountability, and we look forward to the discussion that we're about to have. So I'm just going to open it up for the board to share your thoughts. We have the diversity memo or the plan of action that Larry has provided.
And I would say this is a bit of a moving target. I mean, there are things that have transpired since the most recent update to this, so I'm actually working on another update to this memo for Friday's briefing, and then we'll probably need to look at transitioning to some other different kind of document, because I think this color-coded date progression is probably going to get a bit tiresome after a while. But just as far as some additional steps that we've taken since, we had a telephone conference today with Dr. Larson and Dr. Dusen from Education Northwest, and they will be forwarding us a proposal by the end of the week to do our data analytics. We think that we can get a good start, if not over the summer on that. They have a team of 37 researchers, so they're a pretty robust organization, and they have somebody who's actually working, they're out of Portland, he's working in the Bethel School District right now, and they think that they can tie him into our work here. And then our hope would be to get the focus groups organized around what specifically we're looking for and how specifically we intend to structure those over the summer, so that once school resumes in the fall, we'll be ready to launch with those particular focus groups. As Sherry mentioned, Sherry Rudolph, we've been in contact with, in discussion with PTSA about a youth forum, perhaps looking at bringing together our student leaders from our secondary schools into some kind of organized inter-high activity around diversity and equity and inclusion issues, perhaps targeting spring 2016, so that's a new addition to the plan. We had our meeting yesterday with Lois Frank, and she had a number of really good suggestions about visually displaying the plan, organizing our thoughts and action steps around the three pillars of the plan of community engagement, data analysis, and professional development. The ESD has some new resources regarding threat assessments that we'll be tapping into. We had our meeting with Malia LaCure from the ESD, and she walked us through all of the resources and services that are available through the ESD, including some that I think are of interest to us. They can facilitate a racial equity inventory, where you do sort of a broad-based scan of your organization and then help you distill that down into a profile of your organization, which then transfers into some action steps and perhaps some goal and focus areas. We have made a decision just yesterday to commit to launching a cohort 2 of our PBIS MTSS schools next year, 6 additional schools. So we'll go through that selection process. We have a commitment from one of Dr. Clayton Cook's colleagues to take on those new responsibilities. We're going to work towards getting a multi-jurisdictional meeting gathered over the summer to get, we deal with at least 5 law enforcement agencies, and there are different standards by law enforcement agency as far as what they want us to call them about, based on their own capacity to respond and investigate, and we need to tighten that up and hopefully have a framework that all 5 will agree to, but certainly have a framework where they understand what we intend to call them about, and hope and expect that they would follow up appropriately. We've had discussion about needing to do some more training around manifest determinations with our building and special education staff, and perhaps looking at some greater coordination with special education and building administration prior to special education students hitting that 10th day of suspension where it triggers certain actions on our part. But should we be triggering greater review of program and efficacy of program for special education students before we hit that 10-day mark. So those are just a few of the things that will be added to the document in its next iteration that you should see on Friday.
And for the benefit of those that may not know, PBIS is Positive Behavior Intervention Systems. It's a different approach to discipline. Okay. Do board members have any questions?
Yeah, I appreciate the plan that has come out, and I noticed a number of things that were things I brought up last December when I first brought up this topic, and was saying that these are the things that Tukwila did to work with the community, and I appreciate the plan that is now moving forward on this. I had a question. Well, my first question is about the questions. We were asked to give questions, and I never saw answers to questions. So what was the point of turning in questions?
That was a board member request. Oh, that we all display the questions? Oh, they were having a cabinet meeting?
I believe it's
I
superintendent.
think the purpose of the questions was to help understand what was on the minds of board members, so that as we develop a plan to move forward, we're encompassing some of the major themes that board members have around this whole question of equity and diversity and inclusion. So many of the questions will be encompassed in the data analysis. There were lots of questions about prevalence of different incidents regarding harassment, questions about representation of different subgroups of students in things like highly capable programs or other types of programs. And so those are some of the data analytics that we'll be looking to Education Northwest to move forward for us. I would say there were many common themes that I think are encompassed within the document, so it was good to see those. I think we're certainly open to some of the ideas that have been discussed already about equity advisory teams or an equity director or an equity department. But as we talk to multiple content experts in this area, one of the consistent pieces of advice we're getting is that those are action steps that follow your data analysis and your engagement with your community, so that if you move forward with those because they're the right fit for your district, you have a good analysis of what the roles of those structures would be, what purposes they would fulfill, what roles they would play within the organization. So I think we're open to any and all of those ideas, but need to go through the process of clearly defining what our needs are and what some of those structures, how some of those structures could meet those needs.
So we won't be receiving the answers to the questions, right? I mean, I wrote quite a few questions.
Well, I have quite a few of my own too, and
Yes,
I
I saw
haven't
that.
answered many of my own. I mean, they're reflections, they're thoughts to help guide our forward work as we think about how we improve and become better as an organization. I didn't perceive it as an exercise of individually responding to each of the questions, so I misunderstood that. I apologize.
Well, because I really did expect some answers to some of these questions. And some of my questions were about the data, how many withdrawals that we had from our district, for what reasons was the follow-up on that. And I know I've seen a number of questions that I thought I would have liked to have heard the answer to in my fellow board members' questions. So there is that still hanging out there for me. I mean, my questions are answered. We did hear from community tonight asking about, and I'd like us to talk about the district coming out and saying what mistakes were made. Everybody makes mistakes. Is the district able to give a statement to the community about that?
I think we'll have to see what the investigation report shows. Obviously, the investigation report is specific to individual students who are involved, so we can't share that information. But if there are themes that come out of the investigation report of breakdowns in process or breakdowns in policy, I certainly think those would be fair to communicate. But we need to be careful to maintain the confidentiality and the privacy rights of individual students or families that will be referenced in the report.
I agree with that. I see that there's an investigative report in the plan, and I was wondering what was going to happen with the report. Was it going to be shared with community as long as it didn't involve student information?
I'm not sure how we could share. I mean, that's the essence of the report, so there might be some elements of it that we could share, but I don't know that the report itself, because its purpose is specific to investigating the incidents that happen between kids, would be appropriate to be shared.
Under the confidential reporting of bullying and harassment, I see that Robert Knoll is coordinating a demonstration.
Right.
I expanded cabinet is going to see this demonstration. Can you give the board more information about what that is from the Washington State Risk Management Pool?
Yeah, excuse me. So as you know, the risk pool is our insurance carrier, and they recommend a particular product to their clients, of which we're one, and it's a product called Safe School Alert, and so it enables reporting by students or expose others of incidents of concern that would include harassment, intimidation, and bullying via text, via email, via online, or telephone. And so we'll be having a demonstration of that product on June 22nd at our expanded cabinet. The reason we chose expanded cabinet is because we have the benefit of having principals involved in that conversation. And we'll see what kind of fit it may be for our district. The key things to, in my mind, to be thinking about is if we have a tool like that, we have to have an absolutely watertight process of receiving and processing any information that we receive there. It can't be, so we have to be able to actively monitor it on a regular and ongoing basis. And how that works. So Robert's talking with other districts who use this tool to see what processes they use, where the reports go to. Do they go to the safety and security office? Do they go to individual schools? Do they go to some other place within the organization? So those are all things we'll be discussing and talking about. But I only know about the product what Robert has briefed me on and what I've been able to gather looking at their website. So it'll be interesting to learn more on the 22nd.
So can we have that included in the board briefing when that presentation occurs?
Sure, if there's information we can share, absolutely. And they do have a website, so if you search Safe Schools Alert, you can find their website, and it does provide some information about the capabilities of the tool.
Do other board members have?
I have some questions. So the investigative report, do we have an idea when it might be ready? I think we were hoping last week.
We were hoping last week, by the end of next week is our hope now. We've had some additional participants in the investigation, which is good, to better round out the information. And so the investigator is hoping to be able to provide her final report by the end of next week.
Great. And then I'm just to help me keep track. So we're adding 6 more schools that are able to roll out PBIS, which is great. And so what kind of total does that bring us to?
That would bring us to 17.
17.
So we would be a little over half
Okay.
to our schools. And our original plan was to start another cohort, have it be a 2-year cycle before we started. It's a 3-year process for each individual school, but to have the next cohort start not this fall, but the coming fall. And we have schools that are anxious and ready to move forward, and so it might stretch our capacity or the capacity of our consultants and trainers that we're working with a little bit, but we think we can manage 6 in a cohort 2 next year.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
The focus groups,
Uh-huh.
the process by that's going to get put together, do you think, just similar to how the board was able to offer suggestions on the Late Start survey, would we be able to have input on the focus group questions?
The questions, I wouldn't
Well-
see why not. I mean, I think the people we're working with do this, so I would definitely want to defer to their expertise, but would certainly don't see any problem with being able to share with the board how they intend to structure those. I think, and if you have thoughts or suggestions you'd like them to consider in that process.
Would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Let's see here. I think that, and just to touch on something that Sherry gave in her report I was going to talk about this in my personal report, but something that the Woodinville High School administration came to the PTA was for help funding a counselor. They brought someone on in April, and specifically they're having the PTA help keep that person going so it's not a strain on the building budget. And again, it got me back to the budget conversation, which I'm going to bring up in future agenda items, but this is something we've all kind of touched on in the past about perhaps bulking up our budgetary support of more psychologists and counselors.
Right. So much of the resource that we earmarked last year has gone to our PBIS and MTSS supports, and I've lost track a little bit, Becky, with where we're at, perhaps in looking at some contract for services for acute mental health services. And I'm catching you off guard, so
I can kind of just share
okay.
I'm real excited to get a cohort 2 going, even if it's 6 schools, because there are schools out there that are very excited about it and we want to move forward with it. One of the things we talked about as we looked at that, we needed to be thoughtful in how we approach the whole area of the mental health and counselors or social workers or psychologists, whichever, because if you don't have a good what we call a tier 1 in place, and that as you think about PBIS, it's built on a tier system. Tier 1 meaning all kids, like having social emotional learning curriculum in place, having all of those systems in place, and as you screen students, because it includes a universal screening to identify what we would refer to as Tier 2 students who need additional support, which might be counseling or mental health. But if you don't have a good Tier 1 in place and you screen, you're going to come up with everybody needing extra support. And so that's not a thoughtful way to approach then how do we use our mental health and our counselors around that. So we started off with that kind of focus, and then looking at getting a good solid Tier 1 so we can really identify both the external and the internal student, the student who acts out versus the student who is passive in the classroom but has just as many needs. And so the screener will identify both of those students. So all of our cohort 1 schools now will start next year screening all students, and then, they may start by primary grades versus intermediate grades or whatever, but also then our elementaries are utilizing the social emotional learning curriculum. So we'll have a very thoughtful way to look at what are our mental health needs. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I had a question that came from that, but doesn't make sense to me. Could you explain again the Tier 1? Who designates or assigns Tier 1 status then?
Tier 1 are all students in the school.
All students.
So what are the systems, what do we need to have in place that supports all kids? And so that's looking at what are the positive reward systems, how do we reinforce respect, safety, all of those kinds of things, and it's a systematic way of everybody using the common vocabulary and reinforcing that with students. And then we utilize the social emotional learning curriculum with all students so that they identify which teachers are going to do that. It's usually about 20 to 30 minutes a couple times a week, but all students get that. And then for students who, the way that the pyramid is built with Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, we know that approximately 80% of our students giving what I just talked about will be okay, will be successful. Then there'll be about 10% that are going to shake out, that are going to need more supports. They might need a check-in connect system, or they might need a check-in, check-out system by another adult. They might need a mentor. They might need something else built into the system. And then Tier 3, there's about 5% of those kids who really, really need mental health, might need really comprehensive type individualized services. And so if you build your tier system like that, you've got data that you're collecting along the way, and you have prescriptive services based on the needs of the individual student.
Okay, so you said that everyone would need services if you applied it to everyone. So what were you talking about there? You did say you were going to screen everyone?
We do universal
Okay.
screening, yes, yes.
So what did that comment mean?
Universal screening is
No,
where...
not that.
Oh.
The one that said, well, if we did that, everyone would need
What about if we did
services.
Tier 2 right away without doing Tier 1?
Oh, right, let's say we don't have the social emotional curriculum in place. We don't have the reward systems in place, how we identify kids being good instead of identifying kids being bad, and we just go ahead and let's screen everybody. We're going to come out with our false positives and false negatives both ways, and we're going to over-identify kids who need all these intensive services when they really don't. And so that's why you got to have a good solid Tier 1 base from which
Okay, I understand
that
that.
better.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I didn't explain
No,
that
that-
better to start.
I wasn't getting it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Ben.
So I met with Larry, Janet, and Shannon, and really was very happy to be a part of that. So I have somewhat of a fairly long list, of course, so bear with me. One thing that was brought up in that meeting, and that was brought up in another conversation that we've all had, was the need for a mission, vision, value statement as our primary guiding principles. And again, I would like to ask that we begin working on that right away and have the relevant stakeholders. In that meeting that we were in, I know that we have this tagline that we might say is our vision that Janet, you just quoted, which is great, but that is, from my understanding of researching this and as the email that I sent you guys, that's not an actual mission, vision, value statement. And Janet had talked about needing to thread this through everything that we were doing. And so if we're going to thread this through all these different things we're doing, we need to have that in place, or at least need to begin that work. And I think that's where an equity diversity board could begin work right away and start, maybe we don't know what all these other needs are, but we do, I think we've all at some point at least talked about or come to the conclusion that this is something that we need work on. And from what I've been reading, because I've been doing a lot of research on from other school districts and what do they have in place as far as these mission statements, vision statements, equity policies. I have one right in front of me from Portland Public Schools. It's the racial educational equity policy. She's brought one to us last December. And so back to what I'm saying about mission vision, I think that we can start with what the many people that spoke before us today and asked us, would you please get together the equity, inclusion, or diversity team, whatever we're going to end up calling it, but that we could give them a task to start with right now. And it's going to take time for us to get that team together anyway. I'm sure we're going to go through an application process. And so I'm afraid if we just delay it and then we delay getting our mission and having that drive everything, we're not going to be aligned in all of these areas and start getting off track. So that's the first.
Can quick clarifying question. So when we were discussing the mission and vision, which hopefully I was clear. I think that's a great idea. Before, but we were kind of talking about it in terms of the entire district. And so I just want to make sure I understand. Are you talking about having a mission and vision and value statement for the equity board or for the entire
district? Yeah. And so
I don't
Shannon had asked had mentioned that this is something that we need to thread as the district's mission, if I heard her correctly. I wrote it down. So let me just read what I got from that. So I'm being clear. That we need a mission, vision, value of North Shore School District for the policies and to guide the policies and processes for the school district. We need to have this in place to meet the kids right where they are, the homeless, the free reduced lunch, the racial diversity, all the different groups that Janet had mentioned. And I also wrote down we need a mission, vision, value statement in order to make sure we are moving in one direction. So, and that would be what I was understanding and what I've understood from doing some of this work myself is that that's important before we get the focus groups in place, that we do have that, that we can align everything for what direction does the district see that we're going? What is our value and principles? And lots of schools have it. Bellevue, Federal Way, Lake Washington.
For me, that's backwards. And I agree with you that mission, vision, values, we've been talking about that for several years, that the importance of having that. But to me, that's an outgrowth of the conversation that happens within those focus groups, because we could assign mission, vision, values, but not have captured what is really important to the broader community. And so having those focus groups highlight some of their issues and having some of that conversation take place first helps shape those mission, vision, and values conversations, I think. So it's hard I'm completely open to having an equity advisory board. In many ways that is generated by the community, not designed by the board. Seems like that would have greater community buy-in and driven by the community, because I think that this is a community conversation. It's not just a board conversation or a district conversation. So does that make sense?
I saw the superintendent begin to, have you addressed any of that from the last meeting? Or given thought to that?
I've given thought to that. So a couple of thoughts I have. One is I think that I agree a bit with Janet in that I think that there's value in having the focus groups and the information that drive out of that drive our actions moving forward. We need to engage in the conversation to know exactly what our various communities' experience within the schools are before we presume that any particular solution or action step is the right one. But I've thought about it, talking with our researchers to see if they've ever had the experience or the capability to be able to craft some of the focus group work that they do into broader work around a district vision, mission, and value statement, because that's encompassing not just issues of equity and diversity, but then you're talking about academic achievement, you're talking about use of resources, you're talking about engagement with I mean, it's a much broader spectrum that you're looking at when you're talking about those. The other conversation that I have scheduled on Friday morning is one of the individuals who's reached out to me as I believe it's a parent in our community, but I'm not positive of that, but she works at a very senior corporate level at a large monolithic software company in our area. Yes, and what she describes is large-scale engagement processes that might be more applicable towards vision, mission, value statements in the sense that I think you're talking about, which are kind of the overarching principles of the organization. So, and there's lots of different thought exchange, there's lots of different tools out there that you can use to sort of gather that kind of input. But so I'm interested to talk to her and see what she has in mind and whether that might be something that gets at that broader question. But I'd also be interested in seeing if there is value that we can extract from this focus group work that's coming up to help move us along that path as well. Right now we have our district goals, we have our district performance measures. I think they've served us well for a number of years. Our guiding principles are really outdated because they were really formulated in the environment of budget cutting.
I still haven't seen those.
Oh, they're on our website.
website.
Yeah, but they were
They're from 2009.
yeah,
They don't seem like cutting, I don't know.
They were a clicky thingy exercise. And the focus was, what do you want us to cut first versus last?
We did a lot of community outreach for that. We went out into all the different communities, held meetings, like Dawn said, where there was broad input process.
Is that really guiding? I think, I don't know that it goes back to what is
No,
our values as a district.
they were guiding principles at the time because we were our dominant narrative at the time was diminishing resources. We had the double whammy of declining enrollment and declining state funding, and much of our focus was around preservation of program or prioritization of program in an environment of diminishing resources. So at the time, I think they served their purpose well. I think we're in a different era now where they're not appropriate for the environment that we're in. So I agree that we have a gap, an organizational gap, that our goals and our performance measures don't paint that big picture necessarily of what do we believe we're about as an organization, where do we see our future. They talk a lot about what we want to do with student achievement and how we want to use resources, and I think they do serve a very valuable purpose in that way. But I think this, yeah, I think this work can be leveraged, but I would be hesitant again based on just the guidance we're getting from content area specialists about diving too quickly into a policy or some kind of formalized endorsement of a vision and mission and a value statement before we've had the conversations with the people who the vision, mission, and value statement apply to.
Let me be clear, I do mean including stakeholders in that. I don't think the board should be crafting it or administrators at all. I think it needs to be community driven first, for sure.
Yeah, so I think we also need to think about capacity and efficiency of how we can how many multi-stakeholder engagement processes we can effectively manage at one period of time, and how we might be able to merge some of those together for multiple purposes.
So what would, another thing I would like to see is it was valuable for me, and I'm sure it was for you too, Janet, to be a part of the conversation with Shannon. And I would like to see the board involved more in those conversations when you're meeting with people to kind of create this overarching action plan. I know that you can give us the information, but I probably wouldn't have gotten the same from what you gave me as I did from hearing it from her directly. Just, we have different lenses. Janet has a different lens than I do. And so I would ask that the board, 1 or 2 members is included while we're trying to get this action plan in place, that kind of at these higher level conversations, that we're included in those. And I just think it's really important, and it's a good learning curve, so we're all on the same page, going the same direction. I'm asking, and I'm asking what you guys think, because I know it was valuable for me.
It was, it definitely was, and I think, like you said, we do have different filters, and we hear different things coming out of the conversation, and all put together, hopefully it's a complete picture. So I do think there is value in it. I also think getting all of us, you didn't suggest that, you suggested 1 or 2, which makes sense,
No,
because
'cause
all of
otherwise we'd
us
have to have an
would be
open
problematic
meeting.
in a lot of ways. But getting, that's a good point.
Maybe similar to the process of when we meet with the legislators.
Mhm.
Or when you guys do the board agenda.
Agenda setting.
Yeah, just letting folks know.
Just sort of revolving, yeah. Yeah, especially if we all keep the filter of the whole board's agenda and what we all want collectively.
I just think we're all together in this, and it's just
Mhm.
really hard if it's, none of this isn't disparaging at all, but if it's just the administration and none of us are there, that's just really difficult, I think, for us to all get on the same page in these stages of trying to build
Well,
and move forward in.
yeah. So I think part of our process, I refer you to the Change You that we saw in our work last year, where you start out with when there's change, negativity, and then you finally come along to where you appreciate and endorse the actions. And I think that often what happens is that the administrators have an opportunity to discuss some of these things and have come a lot farther along the process than we have. And having a board member to participate at that point might help move us along a little bit more collectively together. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's a request that I think would help us in this. And so thank you, Larry, hopefully.
I'll have to, some of them are, Carol and I had an hour conference call today that would have been a complete waste of any of your time. It was very much a logistically driven, nuts and bolts, timing, proposals, let's get it would not have been, it was not a policy level conversation. So I think I just need to think about, and sometimes I'm entering into these conversations with people who are seeking me out. I don't know what kind of a conversation we're necessarily going to have, so.
Yeah, I hear you, and I would leave it at your discretion. However, at the same time, I would ask that maybe we just broaden our thinking a little bit, and yeah, if it's a basic, day-to-day, that might not be as important, but sometimes knowing the procedures helps us to understand, I think, the policies better. Sometimes knowing the nuts and bolts doesn't mean that we have to that I personally have to get involved in that level, but that helps me to understand the level up here. Sometimes having that information, and like again, meeting with Shannon and those type of meetings with the Rob Larson, maybe as it relates to putting this together at the global level, at the global level. I understand we don't need to be involved at every little meeting that's, like you said, a nuts and bolts conversation, but I feel like we had 250 people here addressing the board. We have many families coming in addressing the board, and I I feel a huge responsibility, as I know you do, and I know the rest of the board does, and I know that many of us have for the last 6 months, a huge responsibility to making sure that we're being equitable in this district, that we're serving the people and our students of any type of diversity equitably, and that we're helping each child to be safe. And I think we've all echoed that many, many times. And I don't really know another way to get the board involved except that, not that I don't know another way, but I think part of the way is that we come alongside some of these conversations. And I try to be respectful when we were in there with Shannon and not overstep your bounds and recognize this was kind of your meeting, and then hope I didn't. I try to be careful of that and recognize it's your meeting, but I also have my own questions for it with it.
Yeah, I think, just back to the mission, vision, and values, 2017 is an enormous change year, and without having that broad mission, vision, value statement going into that, I think it would change some of the decisions and the budgetary, things, how we address equity and how we do some of the things that we want to do. So it does seem like a very important conversation. Don't misunderstand me. I've been asking for that for a long time. So yeah,
Since 2009, I think.
so I've heard, but it's. But I want to be sure that we are involving not just one portion of the community, but a broad community. I want to be sure that we are addressing all diversities. I just want to make sure that we do it in a thoughtful, process-oriented way so that we have solid ground to stand on once we get to the other side of it. So I think we have enormous resources in our community that I'm eager to utilize. So.
A couple of questions. What the focus groups, what is the, just so I can visualize it in my head, what will those look like and how will we create those?
We'll rely on the qualitative researchers to create those since they're the experts in those areas. I don't know exactly what they'll look like. We're going to get a proposal from them later this week. Part of it is going to be how granular we want to have focus groups. So one of the discussions we had today is, do you want a focus group at every school, or do you want to look at regional, or do you want to look at subsets of populations? What do you want to do around kids? What kinds of focus groups are you looking to have with kids? So I think we'll get a proposal later this week that will help us have a better understanding of what they recommend. There's obviously a cost associated with all of this as well, so we don't want cost to be a barrier, but I think we want to be thoughtful of how many focus groups we have and have that strike that right balance for sure. I'm relying on them to provide us some guidance about how one populates these focus groups. I think there's needs to be some intentionality and invitation involved. I can't imagine that it's a balanced process or a representative process if it's a volunteer-only process.
And then my next question, and I'm right there with you on the mission vision statement, but did I hear correctly that you wanted to delay doing the focus groups until we had a mission vision statement?
No, I just think that, I'm definitely not the expert in how to do this, but I have done these mission vision value statements before at the university and as part of our counseling center, so I do have some experience in them. And so I understand the question you're asking me. And so I'm not an expert in it, but I think that what I understood Shannon to say, maybe this is something that we can re-clarify in another meeting with Shannon, is I understood her to say that it needs to be threaded through the work that we're doing. Okay. Because then the equity board is going to develop their own mission vision values off of our mission vision values, is how I'm assuming that it's played out. And so I think maybe that this is a conversation that we should have again with the people that we're working with, but I hear two ways of doing it. Janet's saying we get the themes from the focus group, and that to me makes sense. And the other way of doing it is to get our equity, diversity
group together now that's representative and have them start building that, so we can start getting that group together, start building, having them have something to work on that we need, and then, you know, so I'm not exactly sure, but
Okay. And I guess the reason I asked that question is I heard a very strong consensus, and I feel the same way, that we get going on this plan of action, and so I'm worried about delaying it. You know, certainly concurrent work with
No,
moving
we
this
don't want to
forward
delay.
on the plan of action, and then, because mission statements can take quite some time, and so I guess I have a logistical in terms of, is there a way to put this plan of action on as a first reading for our next meeting, kind of like the legislator does, where it's just you just have the title, and then as you get more information as the week goes on, it can get further filled in.
I believe that the superintendent stated that he was going to change up the action plan
Right.
and add to it.
Well, it's-
So,
It's
Yeah,
sort of an
it's
evolving.
it's sort of an evolving document. I think we certainly can, what conversation Carol and I had earlier is we'll do one more, I think the next update you'll see will be blue. So, but I'm thinking from that point, we need to change the format of it a little bit, and really, this was part of the conversation we had with Lois Frank yesterday. She really recommended having not only a visual, but really disciplining yourself around the 3 pillar areas, which are community engagement, data analysis, and professional development, articulating your strategies in those areas, and then action planning from those strategies to assign who's responsible, what's the timeline, what are the deliverables along the way, all of those kinds of steps that are traditional action planning types of steps. So those things may change over time, but we could certainly bring forward the 3 thematic areas and the major strategies under those areas, and get the board's endorsement of those if you feel that would be necessary and helpful.
I do.
community requested it, and I think that's a reasonable thing.
Sure.
I think I have to admit, I was exhausted after the last meeting. Took me a day or 2 to recover, but once I did, this just appeared to be such an amazing opportunity, just this moment in time to capitalize on the momentum that we have, and I don't sense that staff or us are reluctant to move forward. I feel like I'm so pleased that we're all eager to continue this work and really move forward, so I think we're all on the same page on that. I'm delighted.
I have a further question on the threat assessment work that has started with the district team. In my questions that I was asked to ask that didn't receive answers, one of my questions was, what is the rubric, or what tool are we using for threat assessment currently? I see that it looks like that's going to be changing. According to your action plan, in some ways. We've had Mr. Mitchell address us twice, and I found his statements moving in that we need to get onto that. And I don't think we need focus groups or anything else to develop that work. I believe that that work can be more immediate. A threat assessment team, or a threat assessment plan, or something that does a better job. It is in the memo, and I see some things that are in there. They don't look like the same things that Mr. Mitchell is recommending, and so I'm wondering
Yeah, so
what
I haven't
that's going to look like.
connected directly with any of the resources that Mr. Mitchell referenced us to. I did look on his website. His business, it appears, is more, I guess for lack of a better term, I don't understand it all the way, it looks like corporate espionage. I mean, they do things like sweep conference rooms for eavesdropping devices and things like that. I'm not sure that's all that they do, but I'm not sure that's the kind of threat assessment work that we're looking for. We're trying to work with educational organizations who face similar types of challenges within the school environment. So looking at contacts within the Seattle School District, looking at contacts within the Puget Sound ESD. We've circulated, and relevant folks within the district are reviewing a framework, an evidence-based framework for threat assessments out of the state of Virginia. So we're tending to gravitate more towards things within the school arena. I think there's a couple of pieces in my mind that are key. One is training. I think recent events have demonstrated that maybe we don't have sufficient training for people in staff who are involved in threat assessments, and then I think we need to look at having some tiers that are involved so that if a situation is such that the staff at a school level who know the student the best have hesitancy or don't feel like they have enough information or concerns about the solidness of their threat assessment, that we have then subsequent layers of expertise that we can tap to bring to bear on the problem. And I think that's where I would recommend we look at getting some formalized relationships with some outside mental health organizations where we can refer students to, where we have ongoing relationships, where we have some level of quality control, rather than asking a family to go find a qualified professional to administer their own threat assessment. You know, we're perhaps sacrificing some level of consistency and quality control in that, with that kind of an approach, as opposed to having more discreetly identified tiers within our own system.
So that review work of threat assessments is underway, am I
Correct.
understanding correctly?
Yeah. We've had an initial meeting about it. We're doing some reading about it. We spoke with Malia about it from the ESD. She's referring us to the person at the ESD who is, they're working on a regional threat assessment. So if you got beyond your district and you still have concerns, that there's a regional resource that we can tap into. So we're looking at all of those types of structures right now. I'll just say, I know it's frustrating, I'm sure, for folks who are sitting here as well, that things don't happen more rapidly than we'd like. I can say that nothing has occupied more organizational time and energy over the last 3 or 4 weeks than these matters. We're also at the most critically busy time of the year, just doing our regular daily business. So we're all working as hard as we can. I don't expect mountains to move between now and next Thursday, the end of the school year, but I certainly think things like the threat assessment process, the protocols with, revisiting the protocols with law enforcement, all of those kinds of things are steps that we are committed to having reviewed, revised, and in place by the start of next school year.
I mean, I'm concerned when I hear the gentleman that came from Canyon Park. So it's not just the issue that's happening at Timbercrest, where he had to get a restraining order out. You know, what is the threat assessment with that student? You know, where the girl was getting harassed, and I think a death threat was made against her. I'm not exactly sure. And then the woman that we had here today. And you know what? Frankly, and be a little vulnerable here, you know what, I was bullied at Canyon Park Junior High 30 years ago because I was free reduced lunch and I had to leave that school, chose to leave, went to North Shore Junior High and then actually left the district and came back in to Bapple High as a sophomore. But, you know, again, I know what that feels like, and I know it's like to be, that's not a minority, but free reduced lunch kid, getting teased because you're only wearing one pair of pants and you have no one to go to, and the threats are real to the student, very real to the student. And then going off, just as that child said, to lunch by myself, or, you know, trying to get detention just so I didn't have to deal with the bullies and the kids around me. So I am concerned. I do think, I hear that we're trying to do things, and it is the end of the school year, but that we're moving on it quickly about the threat assessment, because you know, I don't want to see another child have to leave a school, move a school, not be able to go to the lunchroom. because they're fearing literally, I mean, I would fear getting beat up and you know, because those threats were made to me all the time and I don't know if it's real or not. I'm the kid, right? And I need the adults to be standing in the gap. And so I hear that we're doing that, but I think that is critical that we move on that. Because we have all these issues, not just at Timber Press.
Which is why I asked the question, what is our current threat assessment rubric or plan?
I have to get that for you. I don't have it here.
I'd like that one, thank you.
One of the things
I don't care
that
when I get it.
that came out of the meeting with Shannon, she said something that, I'm sorry, I'm gonna put you on the spot here, but it just resonated with me. When we look at our rights and responsibilities handbook and it's got firm, you know, rules, it's like a, you know, it just has always felt so rigid and inflexible to me. And she said that as we're moving towards the PBIS and everything else, that all situations should be treated as special exceptions and there should be a rubric for dealing with them. And that resonated with me so much. I don't think that we allow for that in our current, what we have currently with our approach to the rights and responsibilities. And I would love for us to get to a place where that is the rule, that we treat every single situation as a special exception with compassion and thoughtfulness and intense listening and figure out, you know, what the truth of the situation is, and then have a rubric for dealing with it. So that's my hope that that's the direction that we're moving in.
And I will say, usually when one kid's being targeted, it's not usually one kid. It's usually a group of kids targeting many kids, and I think that's where kind of the threat assessment comes into is, you know, it's maybe one kid that's going to somebody about it, but it's usually more pervasive than that.
One of my other wonderings was, because I responded to somebody who responded to my letter this week that had not reported bullying, and one of my wonderings is what are the barriers that we are erecting that prevents kids from reporting bullying, and how can we encourage that to be reported more, and how can we be more responsive when it is? That's the direction I feel like we need to. Any specific requests outside of the plan of action? Or I mean, we heard from several tonight. There were. I don't scare.
I'd like to see us start working on, like I said, getting together the diversity equity team before we even have, I think that's going to take time to do that. And you know, we've heard many people come up today and say that they would like to see us working on that, and I'm not quite sure why we wouldn't start putting that together right away.
My question is it something that we put together, or is it something that is created by the community?
Like who's on it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean, like having a team that's going to report to the board.
You know, if the board would just, I'd just like to ask Shannon a clarifying question.
I was just going over my news
You know,
what you said, actually.
Being a board member who wasn't present for the meeting with you, hearing your statements tonight.
I think it's on.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. I think it's on.
So, you've heard this whole conversation. I'm hearing like opposite versions of, or maybe not opposite, different versions of a meeting. I heard your statements tonight, which seem to say, hold on to community request. And I'd just like a little clarification from what your actual recommendations were.
Okay, so first,
I can't hear you.
first of all, to the matter of this whole idea of mission, vision, values, the district, from the 30,000 foot view has to have its own driving mission, vision, value, the foundation or pillars on which you do your work. That would inform